We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus, and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, Architect of the Cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the Sacred Order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash, the courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK and the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rudhyar. For these and more we give thanks.
We are certain, this is written, like as I said, in 71. We are certainly in a difficult time, and what is ahead of us today, I do not know. I am rather pessimistic as far as the immediate future is concerned, considering the way the world and our nation is moving at the present time. You must realize that crises are sometimes necessary to accomplish what is to be accomplished. The only problem, however, is this. Something must be ready before the great crisis comes, when the new cycle begins. For it will have to begin on the foundation of those seeds which have been sown before the crisis. Next. If you have a winter followed by a spring, but there was no harvest in the fall, no seed will germinate during the spring. And you'll have to start at the very beginning in the most primitive time of manifestation. That's why I've stressed so much all my life the idea that I call the seed man and seed woman. The seed person, the individual who is willing and able to gather within himself or herself, as it were, the past of humanity, and particularly of our, quote, Western world, and also of other cultures, because we want to emerge from it, because what we want to emerge from the future, after whatever crisis will come, is a global world. We therefore need men and women of great vision, individuals who are not specialists, men and women who have the vision and the courage to wait, and in some way, through their lives, through their example, and through whatever they leave after their deaths, to become the seeds of the future world. That's, of course, the great choice we have all to make, and we all can make it. We can follow the mass vibration and decay like all the leaves of the world in the fall. However beautiful the golden leaves may be, they will have to decay and become mature for the future of civilization. But it is only the seed men and women that really count. And it is those you should look for if you yourself do not feel yet to the point of being ready to become a seed person, because it is that only which is the insurance for the future rebirth of humanity. I think today it is of no use to try to look to the immediate future because it does look very dark. But it is to look to prepare for the possibility that a new world may arise, if not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. I think it is the only thing which gives value to all our sacrifice, all our courage, decisions, and choices today. It is to become seeds for the development of the future world. So I hope every one of you, each one of you in your own life, in your own way, can someday, very soon, if you've not done it already, make the choice and become seed men and seed women. I thank you. Dane Rudhyar.
So he lived 100 years?
90.
No, from 1895 to 1985. He was not quite 100.
My dyslexia got me.
It was like 90.
And he was the elder that inspired the astrological renaissance of the early 70s.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what I want to do, we're not going to, we're just going to go over the broad themes. Some of the major things of 2019 that I think are significant that will then prepare for the really major 2020 stuff. So there's two things that happen in 2019, which is Chiron moving into Aries for good. I mean, you
It
know,
already happened this last week,
right,
on the 18th.
and then also Uranus making its next the ingress into Taurus, because it went back into Aries for a little bit. That happens on that's already also.
No, it's about to happen March 6th.
Oh, we're not to March yet. Okay, well, we're almost March 6th. So,
almost
so,
there.
right. And then most of the year is Jupiter still in Sagittarius, but then there's that really big ingress that happens when Jupiter enters Capricorn December 2nd. Now, we've already discussed Uranus, Taurus. Okay. Well, not necessary to say too much more about that right now. It's just that it's fully there now for 7 years.
We did a teleclass of that last year.
And then one of the things about Chiron in Aries, Chiron has an extremely eccentric or erratic orbit, and so it spends a longer period of time in certain signs. And Aries is one of the ones that spends a pretty long period of time.
Almost the longest.
Yeah.
So it's going to be nearly 9 years. It's going to dip into Taurus a little bit and then back. But from the time that it enters Aries till the time it leaves for the very last time is 9 years.
That includes last year?
Yeah.
Now, one of the ways I like to think of that as far as a broad theme is that I look at Chiron as primarily a teacher. But what he's teaching us about are where the fracture points are in the human story. And most of those fracture points are the usual suspects. I mean, obviously certain people can have extraordinarily specific wounding, but for the most part, Chiron is giving us a sense of what it is to be human and immortal at the same time. But being human, what do I mean by the usual suspects? Lack of self-love, separation, betrayal, isolation. But the most important of all of is the separation that happens from unity when we're born. The deep grief of being ripped from oneness. But it's something we all go through, So there's all these usual suspect wounds. Some of us have more than one, but I don't know anyone who has escaped at least one of them, even that primal one. Now, if you have Chiron with, I have Chiron conjunct Mars and Scorpio, and there's a very specific thing in my own story. It's not everybody's story. But in general, if we're talking about Chiron moving through a sign, then we're dealing with the challenges, the mistakes, the fracture points associated with that particular mystery school. Just to give an example, where had Chiron been before? I mean, now in Pisces, and if you look at the history of Chiron moving through Pisces, it was one of the really major ingredients of the generation of the late 60s. And then also the last, what, 5 or 6 years. Basically, it's healing through ecstatic states. So basically, music, plant medicines, back then, connection with indigenous, very Piscean approach to receive teaching, if we could put it that way. Well, but what about in Aries? I certainly, if we look at the upcoming themes, particularly in 2020, it could have to do with the healing around the challenges of Aries. Now, we did not talk about the shadow of the mystery school of Aries. I don't think we did that one, right? Aries, as of course, if we look at the highest side of it, as a noble cause or purpose, and they're defenders. I always think of this as the extreme example of warrior Aries. It's a guy that some of us used to know, where he would, when he became really passionate, he would say something like, "I have been waiting 13,000 years for the great battle between the light and the dark. Bring it on." Wow. Which is like an ultimate confrontation, which is the good guys and the bad guys. So I mean, Aries likes to do that, and much to my chagrin, and I'm sure some of you might still have fallen into this. You can see old style heroic dramas, where the good guy defeats the bad guy, and there's mass killing in the whole thing, and there's an uplifting of emotion, and yes, the good has prevailed against the bad. I mean, it's easy to manipulate that sentiment. There's some kind of a healing. There's some kind of a confrontation with that fracture point of the excesses of Aries. And I mean, I can be idealistic, and so I think it might be. I'm thinking also presaging the fact that the next Mars overtone is Aries. I mean, that'll be the Aries overtone in 2020.
October 2020.
Yeah. Now it's in Aquarius, but the next one is Aries, right? So it's the revisioning somehow and the healing of the wounds regarding, the nobility of Aries, let's say. And then how do you transform that into, something else? Something that's not just over and over again, we'll defeat them, that they'll come back and defeat us next life. I mean, this is one of the biggest of all issues in the Native American community. Martine Brechtel writes about this. That if you have mass killing on the battlefield and those soldiers are not grieved properly, they don't go to the next place. They stick around as ghosts or as possessions. They have not been able to go onward, and so the cycle just keeps going around and around and around. Somehow that needs to be healed or transformed in some way. So it's a sort of, I guess Chiron finally moving into Aries has something to do with having to deal with that. By the way, an exceptionally useful book to read about these Aries mysteries. I won't say it's the easiest book to read. It was written by James Hillman, and he has a lot of Aries, and it's called A Terrible Love of War. Is the name of the book. And he basically says, all my astrologer friends, and his son is is an astrologer, archetypal astrologer. He basically said, writing this book, I'm sure this is the last book I'll ever write because it'll kill me writing it. And he predicted it right in the book that that's what would happen, and he died after he wrote it. He basically, his view is that monotheistic religions are the response to the god Aries not being honored and given his space. And so that basically the bloodlust and the need to kill off people and all that, it was because we haven't given due to Aries, the archetype.
Killing off those sinners.
They need the bloodlust and so
Right.
on. Anyway, I'm just anyone who wants to research this more, I'm just giving that information. So Aries is going to be a theme over the next couple of years too, considering Mars' next part of its journey is Aries, right?
Mars will also be really bright, almost as bright as it was this past year too.
Right.
And Venus, of course, just finished her Aries
Yes.
cycle.
And we saw with the Aries overtone of Venus, the rise of Aries, aggressive, war, take a stand, defend the cause, feminine. As well as the excesses of that. And there were
But would you
excesses.
call that the feminine?
Feminine Aries.
Yeah.
Why,
Feminine
why
Aries.
would you call that the feminine? What was happening?
The Me Too
The
movement.
Venus
I
overtone.
wouldn't call that feminine. I'd call that a bunch of women.
Archetypal feminine in both men and women. That's the way we look at Venus.
Right. Yeah. I just don't see the Me Too as feminine.
Huh?
Archetype.
But it came within the context of the Meta Goddess or overtone Aries for Venus.
That's what I'm referring to.
And so essentially women stepping and men also stepping in to say and be able to transform some of the places that they've been repressed and denied and so on. So it was a fierce feminine expression. The whole Me Too, and also all the women who got elected, stepping up and stepping forward.
But also very much in a confrontational sense,
Yeah.
and so the excess of it would be is that of course we got to kill off 90% of the men, which is. But the archetypal overtone for Venus in the sign of Aries is what I'm referring to, and in our definitions of things in the school. Venus is the archetypal energy that is on the world stage for 584 days for both men and women. So it's the projected Venus as well as Venus herself. So for men are part of it too. So it's men's experience with the Aries version of the archetypal feminine.
So starting with the heliacal rise of Venus,
Right.
March 31st, 2017 through November 1st, 2018.
Right.
So
And now
would
the overtone on it is Libra.
So would Chiron and Aries also be a healing of the us and them?
That's what. Yes, I think
Reality
so.
in general?
I think that's
Just in general?
that's what's attempting to be. If we look at Chiron as a teacher,
Yeah.
and how to distill the elixir of the so-called wound, and how to distill that into something that's a healing essence. So the fact that Venus is now overtone Libra is a help.
Yeah, sure.
Because Venus in Libra is Cayelin, not needing an enemy.
Yeah, as a Moon Mercury in Aries, I just rewatched a month or so ago Avatar in my little van, my little
Yes.
tiny thing. And I remember vividly when I saw it for the first time, it was at a friend's house, so several of my good friends on a big screen TV. And everybody just loved it, and I expected to love it. And I was really upset. I was really upset because I had expected this incredible culture, and I thought that they would resolve the conflict in some different way.
Right.
And so when I rewatched it, because I wasn't in my Aries mode so much, it was the second time and it was a smaller screen, I kind of got that it's a whole movie about Aries Libra, and that Libra is the answer to that. But it still upset me at the end because I'm like, all they would do is just come back with more of an army. And just
It's a battle. It's a battle. I understand. Yeah.
I
and
wanted to believe the fairy tale, but so I'm glad to hear you say that.
I'll give you an example of conversations I've had. Is that there's certain television shows. We don't even have television, but it's like 3 shows I like to watch. The Last Kingdom and Vikings being two of them, all right? But every time I watch it, it's like, damn, why can't they make a show of the pre-Celtic times, the times of Cayelin is, well, nobody will watch it because there's no battles, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
The Tuatha-De-Danann? The Tuatha-De-Danann people?
right,
Yeah.
the time of harmony and peace between men and women, and everybody doing ceremony for the sun and the moon and the whole, huh?
Boring.
Or corny, or you know, right. You know, people, they're still getting off on the good guys and the bad guys, and the battles and the blood and the whole thing. So yeah, I think what you're bringing out is at least looking at the possibility of Aries being something different.
I just don't want to go without mentioning on the subject of films that during this Venus and Aries period was, as a woman of Venus and Aries, Wonder Woman.
Yes.
Huge activator. I mean,
Wonder Woman and Black Panther both really showing the feminine as the.
Yeah, sure. And there's an absolute authentic expression of that it still doesn't deal with the transformation of Aries into something other than killing the bad guys.
I think there was a less aggressive version of the Aries female that was depicted.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
And at the end, Wonder Woman talks about how it's all about love and it's all
about.
No, and so, you know, but she had to take out the aggressive force that was causing all the problems.
Even though she didn't want to.
She didn't really, exactly.
Speaking of that, you look like her.
You should see me dressed up as a warrior.
Tonight, baby, tonight.
But you do, I think you do know what I'm speaking of, is that it can go to a certain extreme. That, you know, the problem is that we need to get rid of 90% of the men, and not taking responsibility for the fact that there's a great deal of Amazonian women who actually are supporters of the patriarchal structure and are getting benefits by supporting it. You know, and that has to be also taken into account.
That answer can never be taking out anybody because we're all one.
Right.
And until we find that.
Is there really a movement of women wanting to take out 90% of the men?
Yeah, in fact, the person I would know personally has been quoted as saying that.
Huh. That's not crossing my ears.
I think that may have been a solution.
What I'm familiar with is Mary Daly.
But anyway, if you can see how it gets generalized into. One reason why the school is here is we look at it by archetypes and human beings, not separated into a battle of the sexes or something like that. And no one has been a greater supporter of the Amazonian expression of the feminine than myself in this school. So, you know.
And I think there's several of us in this room with Venus and Aries, and I have a conjunct Eris as well. And Chiron, it would be an interesting little research project amongst us as we move into this. Like, what is this like?
Right.
You mean Chiron
Venus and Aries?
Aries.
I want to talk about the personal part of I think someone said this earlier, but my 2-degree Aries Venus was really not happy when that happened. And it, to me, came down to a confidence issue. That is one of the strengths of Aries, is our confidence, and I had none when Chiron hit my Venus. It was horrible. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Well, you're making the case for what happens in this school. It's just like the vast, I would say the majority of the women have Venus and Aries or Leo. I mean, it's just remarkable how many.
What about this room? How many have Venus on fire?
How about?
How about moon? What was the question?
And moon.
I'm a moon Aries.
How about Mars and Aries? I've got one more piece to that. This ties in, and I'd love to hear you comment on it. I was reading Rudhyar's deeper looking into the archetypes of the signs. And this piece about Aries that I find really interesting, that I resonate with, the way he described, you know, it's seasonally that energy of Aries. So it is the up and out, but it is the adolescent version of there's this bravado, but underneath is a deep insecurity.
Yeah.
And so it's not the, you know, the completely like, raw. Underneath is this sort of thing of, And I think so that fracture point coming out of
To show
the
you that
deep
that's there so you
vulnerability.
can work on it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So that rings true for me.
Oh, there's a gift. There's a gift.
And it's the same thing in the Venus cycle, where basically the earliest expression before all the synodic cycle material became way more used is that Rudhyar in the late 60s, and actually before, said that if it's a morning star Venus, whatever sign it is, add Aries. If it's an evening star Venus, whatever sign it is, add Virgo. So the idea being that if it's morning star Venus, then it's like action before analysis and thinking, and if it's an evening star Venus, then you stop for a moment and ponder before you take action.
Yeah, but it's helped me a lot with that. I used to blame that kind of more on the Pisces stuff, but I see it's inherent in Aries too. That you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've done in the Venus alchemy work is see that it's add fire to whatever sign Venus is in. If it's morning star, add earth to whatever sign Venus is in. If it's evening star, add water for the underworld domain, and add air for the metamorphic underworld domain. Because it's a shape-shifting into a new thing.
So underworld is water, and what's the other one?
So the long underworld is water, and the morning star is fire, and the evening star is earth. And then the metamorphic underworld that only lasts like 8 days at the most is air.
Cool.
That was the only thing I had in my chart that wasn't fire, and now it's fire too.
What, morning star Venus?
I'm a morning star Pisces Venus.
But this is it's very important though to not, in saying this, saying that yes, Aries is like a aggressive or go for it, assertive kind of adolescent. But it's not to say that that's somehow less, like somehow the evening star is more evolved. See, these are just I just want to throw that out. I mean, it's not like in that it's not a developmental kind of thing per se.
No,
and we need Aries, but how to revision Aries into not this perpetual thing of which gets into generation after generation. I mean, karmically, it's really intriguing. I mean, the Vietnamese, during the Vietnam War, some of the elders of the Vietnamese said, "Well, of course this is happening to us because we slaughtered millions of Cambodians 500 years ago." I mean, they had that view of it that was really, really interesting.
It's like helping to restore a cosmic balance, right? That's what
but then it's
Aries
got.
does.
But then then what? But then in 50 years, however many millions Americans die. I mean, it's perpetuating that same old dance.
So if we sought healing through ecstatic states with Chiron and Pisces, then how do we seek healing individually, with Chiron and Aries?
Martine would say it's through grieving.
Oh, interesting. What if it could be counting coup? There's like this way of showing, they sneak into the enemy's camp and you leave some little signal to show that you were there. A more trickster way of doing it versus slaughtering people to sort of say the game can continue, but let's make the stakes down to sort of show. I mean,
well, I've always said that one of the ways to revise Aries is rather than we must win the competition, is what could be called personal best.
Yes.
That you basically personal best, which is then you're competing in a sense, but you don't have to have it somebody you defeat. You're just the best you can be.
Yes, that's called volleyball instead of basketball.
I don't know. Volleyball can be pretty damn competitive. This is we won.
But you're on your side of the net.
How about pickleball? In the running community, when they run races, it's all about having a PR or a personal record, right? So it's that kind of idea. And so they're competing with themselves, not with each other.
It doesn't work.
To
me, that smacks of the what everybody complains about millennials. Oh, everybody wins, everybody gets a trophy. I don't know.
No, I'm not saying that.
I agree with you there, of course.
Right, yeah, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your own personal besting yourself. Like you train, you do whatever, so you can get a better. So it's your competition with yourself, not with others, right?
Yeah, I understand.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I understand.
What does our other Venus and Aries have to say?
I'm really curious. Something came through me like a few minutes ago of the concept of, like you say, it's about healing through grieving, and what grieving truly is, and what is at the core of every spiritual teaching is acceptance. And so, could this also mean acceptance of war, or acceptance of death? In a similar situation as you're saying, the Vietnamese said, essentially, this is karma, to use more of a Himalayan philosophy. But that, like, this is happening for a reason, and so, like, Chiron through Aries would be somehow like acceptance of all that is in the world, rather than saying,
well, acceptance is part of it, but grieving, and grieving is really not something that generally is part of the Aries Mystery School. I mean, it's not taught in the Aries Mystery School. And so Martine is basically saying that's the thing that needs to change, because the situation is virtually unchangeable at this particular point, as far as how many millions have been killed that was no grieving of what happened. The conversation among indigenous people is that, because they know this principle, right? And so there'll be somebody in the village who dies that everybody hates. I mean, this is a bad person, you know? How do we grieve this person? But they know that energetically, that if that person is not grieved, if somebody doesn't tell the story of their life, actually there's a person in the tribe that for 24 hours, as the person is going through their deathing, tells the story of their life. And then that individual has the energy to go to the next place.
That's the foundation of constellation work, and that's why it started in Germany, because what do we do with all these the people that were involved in all this in our families, and if you cut them out completely, it'll get passed down to the next generation if it's denied.
Yes.
And not grieved.
That's the same, beautiful. Exactly the same principle.
Hellinger developed constellations from the Zulu tribe in South Africa, so it is indigenous at its roots as well.
But you know that there's another concept too, which is standing, like Standing Rock, for instance. So those people were, I mean, they were Aries. A lot of the people who showed up were Aries types, and they stood with Standing Rock. They stood. They didn't fight.
I understand.
Lucia Renee talks about this too, that you don't stand for something or against something. You stand. And you let whoever is doing what they're doing know that you see them.
And in a sense, it's the Gandhi approach, but it's also exactly what was done in Bali, where when the Portuguese showed up to take over in Bali, the Balinese said, if you really, really, really need to take this place, we're not going to fight you. We're just going to stand here. Shoot us down if you want it that bad. We're just going to stand here. And the Portuguese were so completely stunned by this that they basically did not shoot them down. They actually turned Bali, I mean, what the approach that they took was that they, there's other stuff to the story, but they basically said they turned it into, from their consciousness, into a museum. So we're just going to allow Bali to be Bali.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and because they just stood their ground. They did not fight, but they said, if you want this so bad, then, you know, go ahead, kill us all. But, you know, we're not going to, same thing. But, you know, the Gandhi approach, which was similar, for that to work, it requires actually the others that you're standing against, as it were, have to have some kind of a conscience.
Right, like I was just thinking.
They have to have some kind of a conscience, and India worked because the English had guilt and the conscience, and the message went around the world, and then they were ashamed.
Yeah, I was just
In this
thinking.
system, it's not necessarily about having a conscience because by standing and just looking at what someone is doing, you are activating their consciousness.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
there's a possibility of that.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
necessarily a guarantee, but you're, you know, if someone
Well,
knows they're
and
being
you've got to
watched.
take into the fact that there's a lot of media involved, which is nice, to keep
Yeah.
the people they were standing against to have some sort of, you know, mores. But I was just thinking in a situation like in Vikings, there was a lot of cultures that just, you know, didn't fight back against them.
Yeah,
They
but
did,
I'm
they did.
talking about like revisions
Yeah,
again.
yeah. But anyway, we could go on and on about this, but I'm just saying it's going to be a theme. How do we do an Aries approach that is not the same old one that's been used over and over again?
You know, these times, looking at the time span that Chiron is going to be in Aries is going to take courage. I mean, personal courage. So just, you know, the healing medicine of finding courage.
Personal courage, yes, yes, I agree.
The Chironic journey also is one of surrender. So here we are in this Aries archetype, and we're healing the perpetrator, victim
Yes.
roles as well.
Right.
And so out of that is release, like really grieving that and surrendering that and bringing in the medicine so that we can fully show up as ourselves.
And remember that in the way of working with the Chiron return, as we teach it in the timeline, is that if you go through the Chiron return all the way, and you really work it, you get to the place where there's no way you look at your life as being a victim. You've made it. And you've digested, whether you were a survivor or whether you had every perfect upbringing, or whether you were beaten up 50 times or whatever. I mean, it's like you have integrated you've digested the experience, and you're no longer a victim.
So think about the impact of Aries and the shadow victimization and perpetrating throughout millennium.
Yeah, yeah. And compassion is part of it, and acceptance and compassion are like related, Yeah. Last on this before we move on to something else.
It just occurs to me with Venus having gone through Aries, and there was a lot of wisdom that came up, and a lot of righteous anger.
Yes.
That for there to be a true healing between the masculine and the feminine, this work that's being done through Chiron and Aries, removing that victimhood to allow the divine feminine to truly find that compassion and that way of having that relationship with masculine. Seems pretty perfect.
Yeah.
Mine just piggybacks right on that. In terms of the grieving, we haven't grieved the witch burnings at all, and I really see that as the scar tissue for the masculine and the feminine.
Well, that's basically the Inquisition and the millions, and that's true. And Martine's point is that America will never be different until the majority of Americans grieve the separation from the land and the destruction of the indigenous people. Until that is grieved, to even get close to grieving that, there's only superficial change.
Right.
Okay, so that was all Chiron in Aries. Okay, so I did want to, but since we've been talking here about Mars in 2020, beginning its Aries overtone.
Wow.
Well, let's now discuss
You mean
this year. No, we'll discuss this year a very important time period. In the relationship between Venus and Mars, there is a time period coming up when they're both in the underworld together.
Really?
Yes.
From July 22nd to September 16th, with their exact conjunction on August 24th.
At the 4th degree of Virgo.
July 27th.
this year or
From July 22nd.
We're not 2019.
to September 16th. Venus and Mars are within 10 degrees that whole entire time.
Is it exactly 24th, August 24th?
And they're exact on August 24th.
At what degree?
4 degrees Virgo. Now, it's beyond the scope of this conversation to go into all the details of this. We're going to be doing a teleclass on it. Is that the relationship between Venus and Mars has an incredibly interesting rhythm. And every 6.5 years in their rhythm, they'll never be seen together in the same sky. So Venus will be on one side and Mars will be on the other. They never visibly come together. We call this the underworld saga. So that now Venus is a morning star, Mars is approaching the western horizon. So Mars is evening star. You with me on that?
Uh-huh.
So what happens is they never see each other. They're never seen together in either the morning sky or the evening sky. And the way they're traveling is that they do meet up below the horizon. So this is called when they meet in the underworld.
Okay, then what's the date of the actual conjunction?
August 24th, I already said that.
Oh, okay, just making sure.
Yeah. Something that's also interesting about this is that as the Venus-Mars journey together, so Venus actually goes into the underworld, I think it's July 12th, but on July 21st, Venus is opposite Pluto, so because we're talking about the triple planetary alignment,
right.
and then let's see, what was the other piece I wanted to bring in about that? Oh, I think there's well, anyway, I guess that's the main one. So, I know, on April 30th, Saturn is with the South Node at 20 Capricorn, and on July 4th, Saturn is again with the South Node at about 18 Capricorn. So these are things that are presaging this journey as we go towards 2020, and Saturn with the South Node is another big piece of that, as well as the Venus-Mars underworld.
Yeah, we had been developing that big time in our end of the year talk. This is highly unusual. I mean, it's unusual enough that Saturn and Pluto come together. I mean, that's only 3 times in a century that happens. And the fact that they're coming together in Capricorn, and then the South Node happens to be in the same zone. So 2019 is highlighted by the South Node with Saturn and Pluto. Well, can you, just based on your background in any form of astrology, you put the South Node with Saturn and the South Node with Pluto, and then soon after that, they both are together in Capricorn. We're dealing with, I mean, the theme I tune into for this is that it's really having to face what's happened in the past with both Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn.
Right. Pluto will be with the South Node on April 4th, exact at 23 Capricorn.
April 4th this year.
23 Capricorn. Yeah.
So it's dredging. It's basically forcing us to look at what the impact of the more recent Capricorn has been, and I know most people in the room have that have been in the school and have come to these events know where we're at about this. But I'll just speak it out here to people that are new to the circles. Is that one of the functions, one of the things that we've taken on as our responsibility is reframing Capricorn. Basically, if we look at Capricorn historically, and I don't mean patriarchal Capricorn, it's that Capricorn is elder, and I was sharing this with Caroline Casey. She says, "Oh yeah, grandmother goat," because I was basically saying it's the circle of grandmothers, and that doesn't just mean women. but it's basically they know who they work. Even if it's men, they know who they're working for. So it's the council of circle of grandmothers, the council of elders that are making the decisions for future generations. And unfortunately, Capricorn, in my opinion, has been usurped by patriarchy. In fact, it's so extreme that when Galileo first looked at Saturn, I'm speaking of Saturn now too, because Saturn has also been usurped. I mean, Saturn is the superego. It's like it's part of the triple aberration. But Saturn, for a long period of time, was not that. So when Galileo looks at the rings around Saturn, he writes down in his little journal, "Oh my God, the old man has a beard." That's just how ingrained that particular view was of that particular planet. It was a function of that time period in history. But we're revisioning that so that actually, Capricorn is a quote, feminine. It's on the feminine side. It's one of the six. It's an earth sign. There's nothing to do with the perversion of Capricorn that we see in the culture today. Even the degeneration of corporations, where originally a corporation had a charter that would be removed after 7 years if it was not serving the public good. That was taken out. So now it's only to serve the stockholders. So I mean, it's just a complete degradation of what Capricorn could actually be. So, but what my point here in the revision of Capricorn is that what happens when Saturn is on the south node just before it joins with Pluto in Capricorn.
What's interesting around this time when Saturn and the South Node are together on the 4th of July, there's a total solar eclipse on July 2nd. That's right before that happens.
Yeah.
So there's another activation point, powerful. Now it's not going to be visible.
And this is still
here,
2019.
South America.
It's interesting. If we could bring in about the eclipses, I have a lot of attention in my mind on the annular total solar eclipse that's happening on the 25th of December. Mm-hmm. It's going right through. It's going to go right over Singapore. It starts in Sri Lanka, goes right smack across Singapore, and then through Borneo to Guam on the 26th of December there. And I don't know about you all. I don't have a really dogmatic take on it as far as the effect of the places where the eclipses go over. But it was not lost on me that there was a total eclipse that went across Sulawesi. And I was going to go to see that eclipse a few years ago. A year later, that location was wiped out by a tsunami. You probably noticed that thing. And so here's another one going through Asia, and then we can think of the implications of the one that went through the U.S. last year. I don't know what the time frame is for sure, but I think there is some reason to believe that the actual physical location area where the total eclipse goes across has some importance.
There's a lot of research that supports that idea. So there's one other thing that happens in 2019 that is worth just noting, and that is that there is a transit of Mercury over the face of the Sun on November 11th in Scorpio. So again, that whole theme of death and rebirth and the shamanic realms and all of that happening, and it just feels like that's another piece that's taking us into this 2020 time.
Do you all know what that means? The transit of Mercury, in an astronomical sense, not.
I know it wouldn't be astronomically, but I was curious about it astrologically.
Well, they're far more common than Venus transits. Here's the use of the word transit in a different way. So it's actually, it's such an exact lineup that if Mercury was, say, the size of the moon,
it'd be an eclipse.
it would be an eclipse.
Right.
You know, so the orbit of Mercury is perfectly aligned with the nodes of Mercury, right smack in the, well, not smack in the middle of the sun, but you know, so that it crosses the face of the sun. I don't have the dates here now. It happens 8 or 10 times a century, but
Much more frequently than Venus.
more
Yeah.
frequently,
So,
frequently
Can
than
we
Venus.
see it?
Can you
Like,
see it?
so
Like
the
yeah,
Venus
little-
It's
on
not, it's
transit?
Not
gonna
with
be
the naked
visible.
eye.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
the naked eye. You have to look.
Oh, in South America.
Yeah,
It's
I tried.
visible
I
in
tried during the
Russia
last one. I couldn't.
And West
those-
Russia, Middle
those little
East, most of
Welker's
Europe,
glasses, you can't see it.
With
South
glasses.
America, North America,
Binoculars,
except
maybe.
Alaska, so we
But you
may
have to
get
have
to
the
see
welder's
it.
glass.
Yeah.
And then most of Oceania and New Zealand.
And maybe
Right.
even these things have a potentially, you know, difficult things, because our school, we held an event on the Big Island of Hawaii for the Venus transit, right? That was back in 2012. And we went to a place on the Big Island to watch it called Green Lake.
It's gone now.
And
wild.
it was a phenomenal location. It had the oldest heiau. It had first navigation, first what do they call it? First migration heiau at the top of that area. This last eruption of Kilauea, it's completely dissolved, totally wiped out. It's gone.
Wow. I have a question on the July 2nd eclipse in South America. Do you know where in South America?
Which eclipse?
July 2nd.
The July 2nd one?
Santiago,
So,
Chile.
going through Chile, you'd have to look it up, there's a band, but it's
Very
I mean,
small.
you'll see some of it everywhere probably in South America, but the line of totality, there's a specific band.
It's only about
So-
it's only about 200 miles wide.
It's tiny and it's just near Santiago, Chile.
Yeah.
Okay,
This
this
one is small.
may or may not be related, but the area where we saw the eclipse got 30 inches of snow yesterday and 10 more today. It's a lot of snow.
Wow.
That is a lot of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's
Snow.
like right track there.
There's a train that's all stuck in Oregon.
My mom's snowed
In Central
in
Oregon you're
electricity
talking about?
in Oregon, but Seattle doesn't have any.
That is weird.
That's
Electricity's out.
I mean, snow is past the.
And vice versa, we in the north, you know, on the 40th parallel got 2 feet of snow, which is
South.
very unusual. And Portland and Oregon didn't get any,
July
right
4th,
before we came down here. July 4th, so.
yeah, right after the eclipse.
Trade off.
July
What's
2nd.
that one, Saturn?
Did you say April 30th?
That was the second side.
April 30th for the first one.
So this Pluto then also with the South Node. You know, it says you have probably the date on
I
that
do,
there.
I think I said it a little while ago.
You
but-
did. April 4, I think.
Yeah.
It's just coming up, you know, and so if you think of the nature of the initiatory process, it's like being forced to compost what hasn't worked, and then Saturn is being clear about what it is, you know, so you have to face it. You have to face the shadow of this Capricornian stuff, right? That's what I think.
Yeah, let's do
So
it.
just think about how amazing this is. I mean, like, when I tune into this, when I first looked at the fact that Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter were coming together in 2020, a year that implies perfect vision, 2020 vision.
Yeah, really.
And they haven't been together in Capricorn in 733 years. It'll be 734 years before they come back together.
Yeah.
But along with it, we're going to have Mars with them. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And we've had the nodes going through Cancer, Capricorn, and that's like a 19-year cycle. So if you add that into the whole story as well, it makes it even longer since we've had this kind of a rare lineup come together. It's pretty remarkable.
Right.
It's like the universe is talking
And
to
the
us.
nodes, and then of course what it means is that the nodes, the planetary nodes of Saturn and Pluto, are what's really making it line up, and those are long cycles. So it's the that's what Mark Jones' specialty is now, is the planetary nodes, and you know, it kind of brings in this larger psychological historical understanding of the planetary nodes. But it's Saturn and Pluto we're talking about here, which just happened to then be conjunct in Capricorn, along with Jupiter.
So Eric, do you want to say anything about this slide?
I just had it up for reference because you guys got into the subject. So, but if you look right over here, that's where we're going to be. You know, next year, 2020 to 2021. This grouping of triple conjunctions. But the pattern is roughly 700 to 900 years between. So the last time these three planets got together was 1583 to 1584.
Wow.
No matter what sign it was in. And the next time it won't happen for almost 700 years. It's 2715 to 2716.
So what happened last time they were in Capricorn?
Maybe we can get out of the dark ages.
Yeah.
Well, that was just before the dawning of the. I mean, it was in the midst of
just before the so-called Age of Enlightenment.
Right, and just really getting a full expansion of the Age of Exploration too. Just that's
first wave of globalization.
Yeah, where colonization was starting to really take form.
So, if we think about the fact that it's in Capricorn, and Capricorn could be thought of as the seed point of a new annual cycle, and also the place where we're noticing that we have a shifting of a 26,000-year cycle on the galactic cross, with the solstice point being there as a seeding of a new 26,000-year cycle. And we have Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto in Capricorn, seeding, helping us to dismantle whatever needs to be taken. Like till that soil, get the ground ready, whatever it is, and then be able to plant the new seeds.
Basically the entire structure.
Yeah.
Whether it's the money system, whether it's corporate structure, basically the old antiquated ways of patriarchal structure of the world. I'm on record of not trying to predict 2020, right? Because we don't predict. But my feeling is that maybe 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we'll look back on 2020 as the tipping point. We're at the point where, like, you cannot deny that the way things have been have to be different. That doesn't necessarily mean some hugely overwhelming, dramatic thing happens then, but that would be where the tipping point takes place.
Well, and you just read Rudhyar said the seeds need to be in place before the shift happens.
Right.
So this,
And the other thing to just keep in mind around the specialness of this, so we looked at the South Node, we're looking at Mars, also joining in with this thing. But the other piece is that we've got the solstices, and on the galactic cross, we've got the December solstice on the galactic cross, the galactic center, representing the start of a new 26,000-year cycle, and this is happening here. So in 1284, it was not happening. And the next time it's going, it'll be 700 years later, it's not going to be happening. Right. So this is so powerfully special and unique, and something for us to pay attention to.
The last time it happened in the 1500s, was that in Aries or in Pisces? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time.
It was in the in that grouping there, because sometimes it bleeds over to one sign or another.
I see you. Okay. I see you, Ron.
Well, I know we're not predictive, but we always go back, and I'm really interested in the synchronicity of what happens through the ages.
Yes.
And I'm really freaked out, especially when you brought up and showed this, that in the 1500s, this was the last time it happened, right?
But it wasn't in Capricorn and Aquarius.
It was in Aries.
Well, whatever. That was a significant thing. Well, one of the things in South America, because there's a lot of turmoil in South America.
Right.
And in the 1500s was when the conquistadors came in and pretty much wiped
the Incans
everybody out.
Taken out.
There's a gal in my exercise class that works for Lockheed, and she has big security clearance. She just came back not too long ago from South America, and I believe it was Lima. That's in Peru, right?
Yeah.
Her job is to sell web technology or something. She can't talk about it, but she goes everywhere. Singapore, everywhere, all over the world.
Yeah.
Russia, everywhere. And she just got back from there to present whatever it is they're selling that's classified. And sitting behind her at the table was Ivanka Trump.
Yeah. I know. Well, she's
so I'm like, okay, she's representing America in some fashion there. And so I think that's very coincidental in this time. This whole year.
Something you're bringing up something that's also very important, because it was in 1580 something that the Gregorian calendar was instituted.
Yeah.
And that was something that fixated our consciousness in a more material way, designed to do that. It was actually designed to do that. So it took us out of cyclical time into linear time.
Yes.
And so that's fascinating to see that that happened.
Yeah. So I'm curious because
at the same time. Yeah.
Well, but look at that. I mean, if I'm looking at it from a karmic perspective, the fact that Pluto and Saturn on the south node just before this thing next year, it's what's the expression, the chickens coming home to roost? I mean, basically the karma of that time period comes due. That so maybe some of you have read those books, 1491, 1493. You know, basically, what percentage of the population was completely wiped out, frequently by disease. I mean, he located the fact that it was primarily from the swine flu, because they didn't have pigs. You know, they brought over the pigs, and then they all died.
Not from smallpox?
No, more of that. A lot of stuff. Even, you know, all of the reason the main reason for bringing the black slaves over was because they had already were immune to those diseases. Because the Native Americans wouldn't work; they all died, and the whites they brought over were all dying. You know, so they had to bring in people who weren't going to die.
Wow.
Okay, I think I'll just hibernate for. Find a rock.
But if we looked at,
but there's an accounting, you know. I mean, this is what you can sense. Maybe this back to the Aries part. You know, one of the things I loved about Marianne Williamson's talk running for president is that finally we're talking about what's the word? Reparations, right? You know, which is part of the accountability and of the situation.
Well, there's something interesting just to kind of link this all together. There's been a few things that kind of echoed back to this morning, but in talking about perception of time, that's really big with the work that I'm doing. The guy who's bringing this, it talks about cultural time perspective shifts, and when we come to biodata sensors, we come back to our own biorhythms, and we start perceiving time differently. And as this interfaces with mechanistic life, things like driving or XYZ are no longer necessary. We have more time. Like, that's the birth, I would guess, of the evolution of where. I love that. Anyway, there's another.
But that was actually the utopian dream in 1970. That basically we would have more free time. In fact, Buckminster Fuller was basically talking about how everybody could go to college, they wouldn't have to work menial jobs, that there would be enough, you know, good lifestyle for everybody and the whole thing. You know, I mean, he really was optimistic about that. That's what would happen with the technology. In fact, most people, I don't know about your group, but I mean, most people are not finding them having more leisure time or more free time. It's basically it's just faster and faster and faster and faster. You know, but if that could happen, how cool would that be?
Well, what's required for that, I would say, is the restructuring of time, because we're still in our old work hours. Right. You know, we're still in all of that. So once there's automation of jobs, we break that cultural time perspective of what our life is for and how we spend it. That's when we'll have more time. It's like, not yet.
Yeah. But it also goes back to who's in control.
It does.
So this is something I didn't emphasize when I was speaking before, is when I say the movement of decentralization, what that is that no one's in control. Everyone's in control. It's nodal networks where we're balancing each other out, right? There's a ledger, there's a history that shows transparency. Like there's a lot more, but that's what decentralization.
The Mars and Scorpio part of me is like, okay, well, then we need to also have the cadre of people that go in and smash the controlling machines, you know, so the decentralization can work.
But that's more old Aries warrior to come up against.
against them.
Are you
I know. I'm just telling you what I'm.
Are you signing up already?
Right.
Reparations is really important to talk about for this. And the first is for Native Americans.
Yes.
And the second is slavery. The third is the nuclear bomb. We dropped that bomb. That's nature. We're talking about Pluto.
And one of the things that bothers me the most is that there isn't any so-called progressive presidential candidate who talks about the incredible, egregious extreme of the military-industrial selling the but he unfortunately his dark side is that he still supports the American empire.
So the things that I've been listening to and reading lately are talking about our human attachment to drama. And everything, you know, so much of what we've been talking about here is we're attached to drama. Well, we can't live in peace as long as we're attached to drama. I mean, it's the way we distract ourselves. It's everywhere, you know. And so if we're the seed group, you know, if we are the seed people, it really, that's the bottom line.
Well, Lynn, let me speak directly to that. I have, just because I think it's part of my job, is to track, you know, all these different possible scenarios. And it was back in the early 90s, late 80s. There was this person who was putting out a newsletter, triple Aquarius guy, named Val Valerian. And basically he was back then exposing, you know, all this stuff, all right? You know, I mean, I'll just name, you know, every possible thing that might be called a conspiracy theory, you know, and he says, why am I doing this? And he says it's an exercise in consciousness. That if you are getting afraid by this, if you're getting emotionally upset by it, then this isn't for you. But if you're willing to include in your awareness all of it and remain in a place of peace, then it's an exercise in awareness, which is a hell of a lot different than people who say, I don't even want to look at that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like you're bringing it in and saying, oh, and that too, and oh, and that, well, I mean, the Holocaust did happen, you know, and we did drop a bomb, and so we can hold all of that from a place of peace. This is actually what Ram Dass told me in 1970, when I was sitting at his feet, and because I was split. Part of me wanted to join the Weather Underground, and part of me wanted to go to India and meditate, all right? You know, and that was a lot of us can relate to that split that was happening at that time period. And I went to him and I asked him a question. You know, it was just you can find this talk. It was at the Menninger's clinic. You know, he kind of spoke directly in my eyes for about 2 hours. It was amazing. And he said, I'm all for social activism. I'm all for, you know, I'm not just saying go in a cave and meditate. You know, if your place on the wheel is to do something about what you see as being, you know, not right. I mean, if you have righteous indignation, if you want to throw out the money changers, right, you know, okay, if that's your job, do it. But you have to be at peace in your heart. It can't be with I'm doing this with an adversary and I'm going to get at them and then contribute to the drama. So I'm in complete agreement, and if this is stirring up more drama, then I'm failing at what this is for, which is to actually be an exercise in awareness, which I hope we as shamanic astrologers can also you know, have within us, you know, that we're not have our head in the sand, you know, that we're not living in just one little place of detachment.
And just a little comment to that, the degree that Mercury is going to be in when it makes that transit over the face of the sun, which in some ways you could see is a precursor to all this. The
what degree is it?
19 degree Scorpio.
All right.
18, but it's rounded up to 19 because the Sabian symbol for that is a woman drawing back two curtains to reveal a secret passage.
Ooh, I like that. That's a great one. It also happens to be aligned with the star Zubin el-Shamali.
Right.
Yes.
Part of the scale is the balancing of the heart and the mind, or the balancing of whatever we're balancing. Yeah.
The Venus-Mars conjunction in the underworld is right, like within, I think, a degree or two of Regulus with the sun.
For Virgo.
Yeah, I mean, it's right in that zone.
Regulus is 0, almost 1.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
anyway,
really close.
I find that really significant.
Yeah, and I always found that fact that they are together in the underworld on the other side of the sun. In Virgo, right?
Yeah.
Which is really helpful in helping to balance Ultra Aquarius. So you've got the
earthy.
Yeah. So it's like they're on the other side of the sun, joining together off the world stage in the sign of Virgo.
We did that astro drama that was Aquarius Virgo. That was the thing to help with the shift that she needed to hang on to. So
And before we take an afternoon break, let me just bring in that when they're together in the underworld, at the sign 4 degrees Virgo, it's actually their union of 2 different overtones. Because remember, it's Mars and Aquarius with Venus and Libra. So it's the overtone of the feminine in men and women, with the masculine in men and women, with the we could say the Aquarian goddess and the Libran goddess and the Aquarian male, which is very different than what their previous gathering was.
Cool.
And those are the kind of themes that we're thinking about all the time now, and I'm suggesting you keep that in mind. And the fact that when they join together in the underworld, on the other side of the sun, off the world stage, it's a different kind of magic that happens than when you can see them join together in the evening sky or the morning sky.
It's also very near the total solar eclipse in 2017, which took place at 28 Leo, somewhere in that zone. So there's something that was planted there, and now Venus and Mars are journeying to bring that back into activation.
So you can see here the way we're explaining it, to what extent we are paying a lot of attention to the larger Venus and Mars cycles. Because remember, when you're looking at the world process, your own individual Venus or Mars are all part of a bigger story. And so we're talking about the bigger story of Venus and Mars that we're part of. And so this is the Aquarius one for the archetypal masculine for Mars, and Libra for Venus. There was Mary.
I wanted to make a comment back when I was talking about getting over the drama thing, because we're addicted to adrenaline, but a lot of that is because that happens through trauma and schisms that we get in our field when we're traumatized. Bruce Lippard said that there's 2 things that will keep ourselves from expressing at their highest level. One of them is trauma, and the other one is toxicity. So those are 2 of the things that will help
the grieving.
Yeah, to help you move in a balanced path.
So really important to do as much detoxing physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually as we possibly can as we're preparing ourselves to be seeds.
Yeah.
And the fact, if you can be in a place, and I'm not saying I always am at all, if we can be in a place of being able to take it all in and not go into fear, not go into reaction, that does not mean it's illegitimate to have righteous anger about something, or to actually feel that really natural mammalian response to defend the ones you love, or to speak out against injustice. So we don't want to curtail that.
That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find my place on the mandala and what my purpose is. Is it to go out socially and do something and speak about what's happening to my home are on the planet? Or is it to just pull back in?
I understand.
And do it more locally or whatever?
That's what we can go deeply into and discuss.
I think it's funny his name is Valerian because Valerian is
Right, is a calming agent.
Valerian's a nervine.
His journal was called the Leading Edge, and I took it from his journal. Is where where's a handbook? I just want to read this in case you haven't read it or seen it, and then we can take an afternoon break. In honor of Aquarius. In honor of Aquarius, we'll find this here, written by the triple Aquarius Val Valerian. All life forms should have the right and the opportunity to have an existence which is endowed with the freedom to produce the maximum amount of probable lines of reality in an evolving direction by choice without repression of awareness or manipulation of physical, mental, or spiritual aspects. You want to hear that again?
Yes.
All life forms should have the right and the opportunity to have an existence which is endowed with the freedom to produce the maximum amount of probable lines of reality in an evolving direction by choice without repression of awareness or manipulation of physical, mental, or spiritual aspects.
Oh my God, that's the definition of Aquarius.
Yeah, I was going to say, in a perfect world.